Today we're going to talk about server-side testing with Ruben de Boer and Tom van den Berg from Online Dialogue. My name is Guido Jansen and welcome to Zero Cafe, the podcast where I show you the behind the scenes of optimization teams and talk with their specialists about data and human-driven optimization and implementing a culture of experimentation and validation. In case you missed it, in the previous English episode, we spoke about copywriting for conversions with Joel Kletke. You can listen to that episode on the Zero Cafe website or in your podcast app that you're listening with right now. This episode of Zero Cafe is made possible by our partners Online Influence Institute, Content Square, Convert.com, SiteSpect and Online Dialogue. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 36. Ruben, Tom, great to have you both back in the cafe, and let's start off with our definitions. What's the difference between server-side and client-side testing?
The client-side testing is client-side and server-side testing is server-side.
Okay, so let's explain the client and the server for those that don't know.
To make it really basic, with client-side, you almost always get a tool like Optimizing VWO A/B Tasty. We have a client-side solution. You place a script on your website, mostly in the head. And when you experiment, when you run A/B tests, the script of your test is being loaded on the browser of your website visitor. Whereas when you do server side, you need to place some scripts on your server and your test runs on your server. So also the code you build for your variation is loaded on the server, which means your visitor, your website visitor, will not see a flickering effect, for instance.
And Tom, what would be the distribution of server-side versus client-side test that you guys currently perform at Online Dialogue?
Ooh, good question. I think 80-20. So 80% client-side, 20% server-side.
Okay. So what are the biggest differences when making the choice? Okay, we have this experiment that we want to run. We have our hypotheses. Now we come to the stage, okay, we need to decide, well, if this is even possible with client-side testing, which is often already available, or do we need to go further with this and do something that's more on the server side, and maybe even implement a tool for that? So how would that decision process go? What are the dependencies in that?
Yeah, it's of course really depends on the test you want to run, but basically I would start with checking the maturity of the organization within conversion rate optimization, experimentation. If you're just starting off with one CRO specialist and not a lot of development capacity, if any, then in that case do client side and you have more easy tests. Whereas if there's more mature, the organization more mature, if there comes a question for redesign tests, back-end tests, pricing tests, then server side is definitely easier and better way to go.
And it's also you're in a better position in the organization, I would say. So when you start alone as a CRO specialist, you're most of the time just running tests at your own. And besides this, there's still a development team who's doing a lot of development stuff. And that's never tested, actually. And when you have the opportunity to do server-side testing, you can actually test all your releases as well. And that's, I think, a good thing, because then you can really see what the impact is of all the stuff you're building. But that's mostly for more mature organizations, I would say.
Why would you say that? So why is it more for mature organizations to do server-side experiments? Like, is it more expensive, or does it require more expertise? Or
not sure if it requires more expertise, but I think that the organization needs to be ready to test everything. And I think that's something different, right? Because like normal organizations, they just build the stuff. They think they know how customers will react to stuff. They think they know that everything they build will actually add value to the visitors of the website. But that's actually not the case. And I think when a company is ready to test everything and to actually be ready to test everything. And I think the client side is more at the starting point of CRO and A/B testing. And server-side testing is most of the time becomes later in the process of the maturity.
You also have to see it that if you start off, let's say you're just starting off, and with the client-side tool, you can have your first A/B test up and running in 1 hour. And you just need to place a script on your website, which is like 5 minutes for a developer, and you can set up your first test. If you do server-side, a bit more people needed. Maybe there's also legal should be involved. So it's a bit more work to get it started. So therefore, the enthusiasm for experimentation should be a bit higher before you start server-side testing.
So it sounds a bit like you're saying that with server-side you can test everything, while with client-side there are limitations. Is it truly the case, or are there also scenarios where you can? Are there things that you cannot test server-side that you can do client-side?
Cannot test server-side and can do client-side? No, I would say no. No, it's mainly with server-side you can run more complex tests like test algorithms, orders in the checkout, steps in the checkout, change the order of that, big features, product testing. That's possible with server-side testing. Client-side testing, there are some hacks, but it gets very difficult and if not impossible.
Can you give us some examples of maybe experiments that you guys did that were not possible client-side, but that you needed to implement server-side?
Yeah, I actually tried to test skipping the shopping cart client-side. So when someone's on a product page, they click on buy this product, and we just wanted to move them directly to the checkout because the average product per order was really low, like a little bit more than one. So we thought they just need one product. Why do you actually need a shopping cart, right? So we wanted to do the client side, but what happened on the background was that the people were actually visiting the shopping cart, but you didn't saw it. So there was like a big load time, and on the back of the load time, they were still hitting the shopping cart, and after that they went through the checkout because it's not possible client side to actually remove that step because it's built in the code. So we tested it and we saw no difference, but when you saw the experience of the visitors in the variant, it was actually really bad. So we thought, yeah, this was actually useless.
Yeah.
So now we're going to try it again, but then server side. So you have a really fast load time. You actually skip the step, and then you can actually say if it really influences behavior.
Okay.
So I think that's a good example. Another one I have is that, for example, a new navigation. We tested once at a client. So a navigation on over the whole website. And if you want to do it client side, the load time can become really big and longer. So that we tested server side, and actually you saw no difference in load time, and you can really measure the difference in behavior.
Okay, so you're saying that. So in addition to being able to test different things, or at least more things with the server side, there are also additional benefits like load time. Are there any other additional benefits with testing server side?
Well, another example which matches your question is, for instance, redesign. You have a lot of companies' websites that push a redesign live straight away without testing it. It kind of makes sense because I've never seen it happen. I've never seen it work client side. I've seen a lot of tries and efforts, but it never worked client side. Whereas if you do it server side, you can test the whole website. You can even test different backends to validate your redesign. So I think that's another big advantage and something you should do when you do redesign. You should test it server side.
Yeah.
And I know that security-wise, there are some advantages. So I talked to a Dutch bank, and they didn't want to implement a client-side A/B test tool in mijn omgeving, let's say, because the developers became a bit nervous and the security department. That actually he used that to create the server side tool, because he just said, otherwise I'm going to implement the client side. And then said, no, we're not going to do it because, all the client information can, go to the tool. But they didn't want that.
Yeah, because basically what you're doing with client side testing, you're placing a JavaScript cookie that is usually hosted somewhere else. So basically someone else, well, you could technically, you can host it yourself, but most of the times that's not how it's done, how it's implemented. So you embed a JavaScript from somewhere else, from VWO or Optimizely or whatever tool you're using, which is then loaded in the browser of your customer. And you don't have any control over that JavaScript, right? So technically they could change it. And if they have a security issue in their code somehow, and someone can change that, maybe even an attack in the middle and change that JavaScript, technically they can do stuff on your website that's you might not want, and as a bank might have.
Yeah, or they get access to the data.
Exactly.
And then again, there are different rules again for where the server is of the testing tool, whether it's in Asia or Europe or United States. So clients are definitely legal, also has a say in it.
Marketing budgets have suffered, and the share for A/B testing has been impacted too. If you want to keep testing to enterprise standards, but save 80% on your annual contract, you can consider Convert.com. With their summer release, you can take advantage of full stack and hybrid features, strong privacy compliance, no blink, and enterprise-grade security. Feel good about your smart business decision. Invest what you save back in your CRO program. Check out www.convert.com/2020. Well, I think since over a year, browsers are more and more vigilant in removing cookies or being more strict in using cookies. Is that an additional benefit for server-side, or does that not make a difference?
No, definitely. With server-side, you place so-called first-party cookies, whereas with client-side, you place third-party cookies, like you just mentioned. And browsers are a lot more acceptant towards first-party cookies because you have the data for yourself and you don't have it with some third party. So definitely, that's definitely a big advantage as well for server side.
In the future, it will only be more, I think, for different browsers maybe. Because now I think Safari is doing it. And you will not know what happens in the next years because privacy becomes more and more important, I think. And another advantage is, I think, also that if you build a test server side and it has a positive result, it should be really easy to implement it because you already built the test like it's part of the CMS or the actual website. So it should be one press on a button to actually implement it. That's not always the case, but we see some problems with companies that they test a lot, but they have problems with implementing winners. And this should be way easier with server side. And that's a good thing.
Because it already exists.
Yeah. So the client side code is actually, you can't use it to implement it, and server side, it's actually part of the website.
Would you say that also means that it usually takes longer to build server side experiments? Because you actually need to build it and make it fully functional, whereas on the client side you may be able to cheat some things, be able to validate your hypothesis, but not actually build the functionality the way it should be built. But maybe it takes some shortcuts there. So
it depends on the test. On easy tests for client side, it's quite easy to set up. And if you have a limited knowledge, some base knowledge on front end development, you can do it yourself. But as the test gets bigger, then server side would be the more easy way to go. Otherwise, you have to build such impossible hacks, which not always work. So it depends on the size of the test.
And in your experience, so would you say that client-side tests are also less effective usually on average compared to server-side tests because you can do more elaborate tests on server-side?
Yeah, I actually would say so. I also think that in client-side testing, you also have the flickering effect, which also can be a test itself, right? Loading the experience a little bit later than in the default.
Yeah, so the flickering effect, for those that don't know, I hope everyone knows. But there, and maybe you haven't noticed it with your tool, so good on you if that never happened. But often tools that load client-side, load the JavaScript, if the connection is a bit slow or the browser is a bit slow or I don't know, you have a very slow computer with and your CPU is overloaded, it might happen that you just load the original page and the JavaScript kicks in a couple of seconds later, or maybe if it's really horrible, 10 seconds later, or even worse, and then the variant appears or changes the page or whatever is your test variant, and that's obviously not a good thing, and that's not something that happens on server side.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think the type of test you can do, like price testing or releasing products and actually test what the impact is, I think that's more connected to the business companies are doing than some of the easy client-side testing still some companies are doing. And of course, you can combine both. So you can maybe have one team, for example, which is doing still the client-side testing, which is easier, for example, to also improve your website in small steps, but also use server-side testing for the bigger stuff. That's also an option.
Yeah, and I think if you have server-side testing, you can test that bigger stuff. And I think more and more people will start to get interested within the company for experimentation, because you start touching the product or the value proposition or algorithms. And I think those big impactful tests, when you perform those, you get more and more people enthusiastic within your company to start experimenting, or at least see what's going on and see the possibilities of experimentation. So yeah, kind of secondary benefit of server-side testing would be to get more people on board, more colleagues on board.
So are there the tools that you guys have experience with or that you see emerging in the market, would it be more tools that are integrated in the CMS that people already have, or maybe even in the analytics tool that they have server-side? Are there those A/B testing tools, experimentation tools embedded in that, or are there all separate tools that you install in addition to what you already have?
I think before that there are kind of two types of companies. You have one that actually wants to use server-side testing also to encourage people to test more. So they actually build their own tool with a UI on it, and they want to make sure that every product team is really start to test. So you get an overview of how many tests are running, what the win rate is and everything. And lately I spoke to a couple of other smaller companies, and they actually only build the technology. So they have a server-side solution with no UI. It's only like technical stuff. But they just wanted to build it because it's the tests are done way better and they can test everything.
Yeah.
And it actually started with a question like, I want to test my search algorithm A versus B, but I can do it client side. So why not build the solution ourselves? And it actually was way easier than I thought it was. And they actually use that solution to run all the tests now. And there are some other companies who are just using it to make experimentation bigger in the company, and they actually build a whole tool around it, and they also integrated the analytics part. But if you start a kind of easy, you can do the analytics still in the own analytics, in the Google Analytics, for example, or in Adobe, and just connect those with the server-side solution you have.
Yeah, because the A/B testing part, whether you do it client-side or server-side, it's not that complicated, right? You just need to be able to divert your traffic in a decent split between the variants that you've set, and do that in a decent random manner. But so server-side tools they exist for a long time now also, but I think we can, it's a fair assumption or fair statement that the client-side tools were very popular the last 10 years and are a bit more mature than the server-side tools. So you guys been experimenting with server-side tools more and more. Is that a fair assessment? Are there already things that in server-side that you cannot do or not yet do, or like usability issues that you see there? Or are they indeed less mature?
Yeah, it depends. There's also organizations can either choose to build it themselves with UI or without UI, user interface. But tools like A/B testing, Optimizely now also have their solution for server side with the great UI, with the experience they have from their client side tool. But still with server side, you are, as if you're a CRO specialist, you're probably more dependent upon development than you are when you build test client side.
What kind of skills would you need in addition to running tests on client side? Because if you run test client side, you already need to know a bit of HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Mm-hmm. So you're saying that that's not sufficient to run an experiment server side?
Server side, you actually code into the original code of the website. So it depends in what language your website is written. And you need to know that code, which could be a bit more difficult than the basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript or jQuery if you prefer.
Yeah, and it can also be harder to find someone to actually be part of the team, because like front-end developers, you just need to find one, and they actually can all build the test. But if you have a specific code used on your website, or the code language, which is hardly used in Holland, for example, and it's really hard to find a developer for building tests, and then maybe you have to, but they're also building a lot of other stuff, then it's hard to find someone who actually is going to help you building A/B tests.
Yeah, so front-end developers are way more common, and they all know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript almost. While backend can be, it's a very diverse landscape in the kind of languages that you need. So you probably need, for server-side testing, you probably need the developers that actually build the website to also make your test. So you're fishing in the same pool of resources, so to say, as the rest of the company. While for client side, you might be able to do it yourself, or it's fairly easy and relatively cheap to just get an outsider and to build the test for you.
Yeah, exactly. And if you are a CRO specialist and you build client side, I think you can learn front-end development in a couple of hours, maybe 2 days. Yeah, it's not that hard to run the basic tests. I mean, if you decide to do the small and maybe medium complex tests yourself, you can learn it in like 2 days and give the complex test to development. Whereas if you go to server side, you always will probably need the development if you are a CRO specialist. But I also see with clients that dependency on development is increasing once websites go to SPA, single page application. So for instance, React, Angular. It's harder to test on those. Client-side tools don't always work. So that's another reason why you could move to server-side testing. And again, you are more dependent on development in that case anyway.
SiteSpect offers a worldwide unique A/B testing, personalization, and product recommendation solution. SiteSpect works server-side without any tags or scripts, which guarantees an optimal performance. The SiteSpect solution eliminates delays and the chance of any flickering effects, and this approach also ensures that the current and future browser security rules like ITP and ETP don't make an impact on your A/B testing and personalizations. For more info, visit sitespect.com. So you've helped companies doing those experiments, but also implementing the server-side tool set. What are some common mistakes or roadblocks that you see with companies that are implementing server-side experiments?
I think that many companies think it's really difficult to actually build a solution. So I spoke to one company that actually discussed for almost a year that they wanted to set this up. Like, we should go server-side testing. Yeah, are you sure? And they made all like the pros and cons and discussed a lot about it. And then they started it. And after 3 weeks, they had the basic version live. And after 6 weeks, with just one developer or one CRO specialist, they actually had like a pretty decent server-side solution ready to actually be used. Yeah. So I think server-side's also actually at the vendors, a lot of people don't know a lot about the server-side solution. Like the marketing guys at the vendors, they all use client-side, and server-side also. I think has a kind of, I don't know, name or feeling that it's really difficult. But when you talk to developers, it's actually not that hard. So our advice would also be to just start using it and start actually building it and see how it works.
So would you always? So those tools, do they always? So the more common tools that offer server-side testing, do they always work with different kinds of programming languages, or does it totally depend on the programming language that your site is built on?
Good question. I haven't run into those problems yet, so I wouldn't exactly know if it runs in all languages. I would assume it does on the most popular languages.
And if it doesn't, then of course, then self-built will be probably the best solution for you.
Yeah, exactly. And start like Tom said, start easy. Just start with the technology itself, maybe not yet the user interface. And from there you can keep on building. Then start a user interface, get more data server side. But you can start off easy with just the technology.
So when talking about technologies and vendors, of course, there's, we already mentioned A/B Tasty is a solution, VWO full stack, Optimizely full stack. Of course, we have SiteSpect as a solution, which is a bit different, I think. SiteSpect is a proxy server or the intercept method. So they put a server between your website and the customer for serving out those different variants. I think convert.com also has a solution for this. But when I was researching those solutions, I came across a bit of different definitions of server-side testing. I think some of them referred more to a hybrid model. I mean, technically, if you run a client-side A/B testing tool, almost all of them also offer split URL testing, and you could argue that it's also a form of server-side testing because the actual variant lives on the server, you just use the JavaScript to point your users to different solutions. So that might be some kind of a hybrid method. So what are your favorite technologies or vendors for doing this?
Good question. I first of all like the split URL. Like we were talking to each other before you started recording. There are some hacks you can do client side, which is then kind of server side testing. For instance, for a fashion brand, I wanted to test algorithms for recommenders. So we basically had 2 recommenders on the product page, one on display none, one on display block. And in the client side A/B test with a simple CSS change, we switched them around. So we showed the other recommender.
Yeah.
And that way we test the algorithms. So this is a kind of nice hack. But for tools, I don't really have a preference yet, but I've seen some good solutions.
Yeah, I also did. I think it was 5 years ago for the algorithm. There was this, when I came on board, there already was this algorithm running to optimize the category pages. Mm-hmm. And the tool allowed for basically testing one algorithm versus another. So you could test those, but they didn't have so it was already built in and didn't really have an option to turn it off and actually test the algorithms against doing nothing. And I think I just used the client side A/B testing tool just to basically rip out the algorithm tool to do nothing, to disable it, and then run that against each other. Tom, any additions on favorite tools?
Yeah, the funny thing, lately I did some research on this with Ruben on different companies, and we actually found out that most companies are building it themselves.
As in your clients, Yeah,
they're not all our clients. Some are our clients, but also these companies were actually using or considering server side, and most companies actually develop the solution internally instead of using one of the vendors we just discussed.
So on the one hand, that would indicate, okay, it's actually quite simple to do it yourself. So maybe that's a good idea. On the other hand, I would say it still sounds a bit inefficient, right? Why aren't there server-side solutions that I can just pull off the shelf and implement for my company? Is it a technology issue? Are those all really expensive to do, or what do you think is causing this?
Yeah, I think that actually just building a solution can be quite easy, but then of course you still have some maintenance also, right? To actually keep on using the technology if you build it yourself. So maybe the startup can be really cheap, but then you will also have maybe one developer actually maintaining your own solution. And if you have a client or if you use a tool for that, maybe you pay them for the tool, but you don't have the maintenance. So I think it's kind of balance between those two, how you actually, find out what's the best solution and maybe also the cheapest one. That's, I think, somewhere in the middle.
So it depends a bit on how you're organized on the development side within your company, if you can basically do one or the other. Yeah,
and again, that also depends on the goal. If your goal is to do server side with development, then their own solution will probably be doable to build, just the technical part. But if you want to allow it for a lot of people in the company to use, a lot of developers, a lot of product teams, then using a vendor which has the technology already, a good user interface based on their experience with client side and the data implemented, they have the full solution, but that costs more money. Whereas you can start off with yourself, the technology like we mentioned, and then build from there, build the user interface, build the data. So it's also a choice of the goal. Yeah, by the way, those questions from the most common mistakes and the favorite technologies, those came from Khalid Saleh, one of our other podcast guests. He posted those questions in our Facebook group. And if you want to be more involved with other Zero specialists, you can go to zero.cafe/Facebook and ask your questions towards our upcoming guests.
Guido, can I add one thing to the tool discussion we just had? I think a couple of companies actually told us that it's cheaper to build a solution themselves than instead of using a tool. Mm-hmm. So I think that's especially the companies who just build a technical solution. So they don't build a whole UI around it. They just use it to test server side. Yep. And I think also if you look at the vendors, for example, SiteSpec, they have a lot of knowledge about server side testing, and they're actually, they do it for a long time already, although it's not the exact same solution as the others. So I think they are a little bit better in it, also into actually used in their marketing, because I think a lot of people actually at the vendors, they don't know a lot about server-side testing. It's mainly focused on client-side still. So I think they need to step up their game as well, although they are pretty big, some companies. And I think Optimizely, for example, is really focusing on it. I think they can still make some improvements there to actually show how to do it, how easy it is, give more information, actually show use cases. And that's maybe also kind of, maturity which need to grow on that kind of tooling.
Would you say that in terms of data quality for your experiments, or is there a difference between client-side and server-side testing? Is there any benefit for going server-side?
It depends. If you do everything right server-side, then you get probably more. Yeah, of course, that's always important. If you set up everything right, then server-side can give you more trustworthy data as it's raw data coming from the server, instead of that you send it to Google Analytics who makes sense of it. So I did hear about cases where server-side data is more trustworthy than client-side data.
For over 10 years now, Online Dialogue advises about evidence-based conversion optimization with a focus on data and psychology. We see that analyzing data and recognizing customer behavior results in a better online dialogue with your clients and a higher ROI. The team of strategists, analysts, psychologists, and UX specialists gathers valuable insights in the online behavior of your visitors, and together with you, they optimize the different elements of your CRO program through redesign, expert reviews, A/B tests, and behavioral analysis. For more information about their services, go to onlinedialogue.com. Yeah, so you're not missing out on anyone that's blocking JavaScript.
Yeah, exactly.
But then still you have all the raw data, and then you need to make analysis around it, right? So the bad thing or the negative part can be that you're actually kind of rebuilding your analytics tool next to your Google Analytics, which you already have. And then you have your own server-side solution with your own analytics tool, but you're actually selling kind of products on your website, right? It's not that you're a kind of vendor for products. So, I mean, I think you need to be kind of careful with it as well. Otherwise, you spend a lot of development time and people on actually, building stuff which is already out there.
Yeah.
So it's I think the data can be better, but maybe be a bit careful with the kind of rebuilding your analytics solution.
Aren't there any open source tools out there on GitHub that people can just pull off the shelf and then try to implement it for their own company?
I know Facebook has open source about how they test server side. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about any others right now.
I'm not sure if it's open source, but Split.io also has a free solution. I think it's not open source, but a solution you can also use for server side.
I'm going to do a quick Google. So I come across Facebook, and there's this Wasabi. Have you guys experimented?
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah.
So what any things that you guys are working on right now to make server side experimentation better?
To make it better.
I don't know, but you guys run a lot of experiments. Do you need to rebuild? I know you guys built automation for experiments. Saw the Hotjar event lately with Tom sharing things, how he automated the reports from experiments with Airtable. Is that something that you now completely need to rebuild when you do server-side testing, or is it something you can also reuse?
Yeah, we can still use that, especially if you don't make the analysis in the tool or you build yourself or from a vendor. But if you still use your analytics solution for that actually doesn't change.
Yeah.
I think what we do mostly now is that we discuss with our clients if it's actually a solution they need or not at the moment. Because I think load time becomes more and more important nowadays. I think Google is also focusing more on that. So your actually results in Google are influenced by the load time of your website. And if you put a lot of scripts on it, it actually becomes slower. And the experience becomes better for the visitor. We use server side, so there are becoming more and more advantages of actually doing it. So that's why we also start to discuss it with our clients. And it depends, of course, a lot of the stage of maturity, also the maybe the budget there is, and the status of CRO or A/B testing inside the company. So it's been more and more discussed actually the last months, I would say, compared to the 4 or 5 years I worked on Dialogue before. So that's kind of the development we're now in.
Yeah, so basically helping clients choose their tool and try to determine together if the client side is sufficient for now, or that they should switch to server side, and how they should do it.
So would you say for new clients or clients that are reevaluating their platform, are you more and more recommending server side, or maybe even only recommending server side by now? Or?
Yeah, I would say so, but again, it depends on the maturity of the client.
Yeah, or it's a combination. So some tests we're doing server side, which are bigger, more important for the company, for example, and we're still testing client side next to it. And what's actually a funny story I heard lately, when you have a CRO team and you're doing client side testing, there's a developer building test. And he's kind of, he has a CRO mindset. He's used to that, like between 20 and 30% of the experiments is positive. But when you start doing server-side testing, you actually get to talk to different developers. And they are used that their code is always going live, right? But now, if you do server-side testing, it's actually tested it. So then they see that the 30% is working. So they actually throwing 70% of their code away. And that's not really good for their mindset and how motivated they get. So we heard from different companies that they actually are actively working on keeping their developers motivated to still building stuff, although actually 70% is thrown away maybe. So that's different people with a different mindset. That's actually kind of change maybe in culture or behavior, which is pretty interesting.
Well, I can imagine that your approach can be to develop new functionality that those developers are building and doing that more in smaller steps and keep validating if it is actually adding value to a user instead of building the full new functionality, working on that for 6 months, only to have it shut down by an experiment 2 weeks after. That's obviously not nice for those developers. But if you can build in small steps, and then early on you can quickly already see, hey, this is not working, or we should go a different path. The chance of something not working over a 6 month period is much smaller for such a large project. I think.
Have them build MVPs, the smoke tests, and step by step. Yeah.
Exactly. So how do you mentioned this earlier that you can now with server side testing you can actually experiment on a full release. Do you already have clients that have this implemented? So how would that process look like? So there's a release ready. Maybe there's like a twice a month or maybe even a weekly release of their website with new functionality. Do you do like a full split test between the previous version and a new version, or how would you approach that?
Yeah, so we have one client I'm working with. We're actually doing it now server side, and the cool thing is that one of the people from like in the CRO team is also part of the development team. So she's like kind of product owner in both teams. So some tests are part of the sprint they're actually doing, and they have a release every 2 weeks. And it's just going live with the release on, for example, Monday. So then when it's pushed live, they actually push an A/B test live instead of the whole, instead of the code to 100% of the visitors, it goes to 50%. And actually the A/B test is starting. And we already implement the end date when it goes live. So it goes out automatically. And we, of course, monitoring the result day by day. So that's actually kind of how it works now.
How long do those experiments run?
Yeah, depending on the runtime and the minimal detectable effect we have. So we actually calculate it up front. So it's a kind of more planning because you
don't always have a minimum detectable effect. If it's just a release that's, I don't know, it's not always based on a proper hypothesis, whatever they're implementing, right? They're just like fixes or I don't know, additional functionality that had to be done because legal or whatever. So how would you determine that?
Yeah, well, to add to that, indeed, you preferably have an MDE, but it's not always the case. I just finished a project with a big multinational company where we tested the whole website, both front end and back end server side. Their back end was really outdated, so logistics wasn't as good, documentation of finance, order follow-up. Front end also needs some feature fixes, so they had a complete new backend, front end on different server. And we did it server side, and that worked well. We analyze the data, tweak, and make sure that the conversion rates don't drop when you push the whole release, the new website live.
Yeah.
So that's definitely an example of where server side is just perfect to work with and make sure you have low risks when you do a full release.
But you each week it can be something different, of course, that they change. It can, especially server side, you can change a lot more things than you experiment on client side. So it's I can imagine that's only like the main KPIs that you just basically check on if they're not changing too much. But you cannot check every variable that's out there.
No, true. And I think it's not the case that most companies we're working with, that they test everything. So there's a release, and maybe when it's something really small on a page with not a lot of visitors, then you can still test it. You can also think, okay, the impact would be really low, so just put it live. It's not like Booking.com that they test every bug or everything. Yeah. But especially on pages where there's a lot of impact in the order flow, that's the thing we're focusing on. And then we actually tested server side, although it's a new subscription model or a new pricing stuff or a total different redesign from that page. Yeah. So that's a kind of choose your battles, because otherwise, when everything becomes a test, also on the FAQ page, blah, 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 whatever, where like 10 people a day, maybe you should just put it live, and in 2 years, maybe you will be there as well. But I'm just saying it's more like a check that things don't go horribly wrong when you release something, right? And that's what you want to control for.
No, indeed. If you have the server side technology, you can do feature flagging, feature rollouts as well. So it doesn't have to be a big experiment, but you can roll it out 5%, 10%, 20%, and see if there are no bugs, errors, see if nothing breaks.
Yeah, especially if those are big changes, you want to maybe gradually release them to your audience.
And I think it's a big underestimated part of A/B testing is that what you're saying is not losing money instead of you're only looking for winners. But in this case, you can also. I once talked to Lucas from Booking about it. He also said that that's actually the main advantage for Booking is that they are sure they're not losing money with everything they're releasing. Yeah. Because that already makes a big difference. Yeah. And then, of course, you want to add some extra revenue also by finding a positive result. But I think many companies don't know what they actually do in that area.
Yesterday's brainstorm was so good. I really liked Steph's idea of running that test on the call to action buttons. Making them orange will really make them stand out, don't you think?
Yeah, right. Do you want to design real A/B test winners and achieve enormous conversion uplift? Then stop brainstorming and take a scientific approach. If you can read Dutch, follow the steps in Online Invloed, the bestseller on managementbook.nl. Or enroll in the author's course and become an expert in applying proven behavioral science yourself. Go to onlineinfluence.com for more information and free downloads. Yeah, especially if your A/B testing capacity is limited and you can only do so much experiments in a month, while on the other hand the developers are releasing new stuff like every week there's a new release. It's like we call in Dutch dweilen met de kraan open. Mopping the floor while the faucet is still running. So you can be very limited, but you want to make sure that those releases don't break any big things or make things worse for your customer. There's no intention to do that, of course, but you want to make sure that that's not the case. So I just so one last I think is something that's a benefit for server-side testing, since you have all the data in-house. I think almost by definition, you have all the data from individual customers, and it's easier to run non-binomial tests server side, right? You can more easily compare revenue gains for experiments when you run them server side versus client side. If you do client side, usually you're working with aggregated data in Google Analytics, and then it's not possible anymore to compare those.
No, that's very true. When I was working for a publishing website, we had a non-binomial KPI, page views, returning visitors. And we had a separate script within each test to send the client ID to Google Analytics and do it that way. But yeah, server side should be more easy to get that data.
Exactly. There are hacks to do it client side, but it needs additional work.
Yeah.
So, and I want to make a small sidestep. Like Tom just mentioned, of course, speed is very important for your indexation. So that might be a reason to run server side testing too, because it's a bit faster. Recently, Google announced that they also want to include like UX factors in their ranking. Have you guys read anything about that?
I actually did it.
So they want to include those in the ranking, but I'm very much wondering how on earth they will. I mean, it needs to be automated. They're not having user panels evaluating every site in the world, I think. So there must be some way to automatically judge the UX of a website. I mean, I'm very curious how they will be doing that.
Well, in some sense, it's already in there, of course, because if you have a search term, like you want to buy a computer, and you click on the first result, and within a minute you're back at Google and click on the second result, then Google already knows that the first result wasn't that relevant for you. And of course, when UX as well, that contributes to people finding the information they need and buying the computer they want. Yeah. So in some sense, I guess it's already in there.
There's definitely an overlap. So for the effectiveness of the page, that's definitely the case. If you're back in Google, then that's an indication. Hey, apparently that person didn't find what they were looking for, so they're back. So since they announced this as a separate thing that they will be looking at user experience, I'm intrigued about how they will be doing this.
I think they just need to crawl every website on how many A/B test companies are actually running, so they know that companies are actually checking what is working better, and then they should give a higher score for that website.
So then I just go about and just run 1 million experiments on my website, not caring about the results.
Yeah, then your load time becomes really slow, so you still end up.
No, I'm doing it server side, so it's all fine.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, true. But I'm really curious how they're gonna do it. Yeah, because it feels a kind of subjective in this way. So I'm not sure how they will fix that. But
I think you can measure it. I just think it's going to be really hard just by running a script on a page. So any other things you guys are looking forward to do to change or improve in the coming 12 months, whether it's server side testing or any other general things that you're working on?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, I'm still working on, also with Ruben a bit, on getting more and more of the process in Airtable, actually.
Yep.
So in the latest talk you heard, we actually included the analysis of the test. We are also now implementing the research, so the phase before the experimentation. So it becomes more and more, kind of platform where all the information, all the knowledge of optimization is there.
Yeah.
So we don't need to build a A/B split on top of it, and we have our own tool. Maybe that will be cool in the next year.
And the Airtable talk, I will link to that in the show notes. That's I think it's like a 5-minute talk. It's quite short, right? It's very.
The way to set it up, you only had 5-minute talks, 5 talks a day for 5 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah.
For 5 days.
4 minutes and 51 seconds. It's, you're very good at summarizing.
It was actually
stuff.
pretty hard because you were recording yourself, and the timer was next. Lying there, I was like, okay, 4 minutes 20. Okay, I need to hurry.
So you talk faster and faster towards the end, or?
Yeah, kind of.
Basically, in short, you show the solution where you use Airtable, where people can log their experiments, and then you're even using the API to get Google Analytics data in via Google Sheets, I think.
Yeah, that's correct. So we put the Google Sheet and we automatically update it into Airtable. So the good thing is that everything of the process, so the design, the hypothesis, all the information needed to actually get a test from A to Z is already in Airtable.
Yeah.
But you also want to create a database with actually results, and we all combine that in Airtable now. And the next step is to actually also put the research we do upfront in it. So you actually tested 10 experiments on the homepage, for example, but you don't only do A/B tests, you also have different insights from the homepage. And it would be cool to give one overview of the experiments, your surveys, the data, heat maps, whatever, everything together in one place.
Yeah, and automation of the reports is, of course, very, very helpful, very nice to save a lot of time there.
Yeah, I think it saves around 2 to 3 hours per experiment. So, yeah, that helps.
Yeah.
That's a lot of time if you run a couple of experiments a month.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and you have all the information in one place, which is it's a big benefit.
Exactly. Very nice. Guys, thank you so much for sharing your experience with server-side testing, and we'll link to the tools mentioned. We'll link to I had some other blogs on this topic if you want to read more on this. There's a blog on convert.com, CXL, and Invest. They all have written some stuff about this lately, so make sure to check those out. And of course, I'll link to Tom's talk from the Hotjar, the lightning talks about 3 tips to improve your experimentation program with Airtable.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And this concludes Season 2, Episode 36 of the Zero Faith podcast with Ruben de Boer and Tom van den Berg from Online Dialogue. Next week, another English episode where we'll be discussing how you can and should be using experimentation to manage risk and create a risk profile for your own or your client's business. And we'll be doing that together with the CEO of Conversion.com, Stephen Pavlovich. Talk to you then, and always be optimizing.